I'm going to start off. I'm Anya Collette. I'm the planning officer for the city of Bangor. We've organized this event today to get some more education out there to people about historic resources and permitting in Bangor. I'll be chiming in just a little bit during the presentation, but for the most part, Mike Pullen here is going to be doing the presentation. If you haven't already met him, I think he introduced himself to most of you, but he's our advisory consultant to the Historic Preservation Commission, and he's an architect with Artifacts Engineers and Architects, or Architects and Engineers. He also has Emerson here, who's an architect in training, I believe, also with Artifacts. And we have Matthew Altiero, who's our planning analyst for the city. So with that, I'm going to let Mike start off.
Great. Thank you, Anya. We're in a perfect place to talk about historic preservation. This library building that you're sitting in right here was the result, actually, of rebuilding the city after the Great Fire in 1911. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But the topics that we're going to cover today include those ones that are listed here. We're probably going to try to go through about half of that, then we'll break for lunch and see how that goes for the remainder in the afternoon. I feel, as an architect, very privileged to be able to work and practice in a city like Bangor. I was born here. I know the fabric of the city well, but I think the thing that excites me the most is when I see buildings restored back so that they can have another 150 or 200 years of service. This is incredible. Bangor has a great wealth of fantastic historic buildings. We're going to cover some of that today. And I'll send you to some resources that you can get that'll help to build your libraries about historic buildings if you haven't started one already. So the topics we're going to cover today include a little talk about historic Bangor, about the benefits of historic preservation, about best practices in historic preservation, the guidelines and standards that historic preservation planners use, sustainable aspects of preservation. Sustainability is a big thing. Local architectural styles, so not everything is colonial, even though you want to call it such. There's actually some other styles you may want to key in on. Preservation nomenclature, some of the terms that are used. We're going to cover the local preservation process, how you get approved here in Bangor and get reviewed. We're going to talk about accessory dwelling units, which is a big item for discussion lately, and preservation resources for you all to go after as soon as you rush out of here and get back to your computers. So I did want to mention that Emerson Jones with me, the architect in training, has a personal interest in historic preservation. He's really building himself a great library of what we call pattern book houses. These are houses that were built from standardized plans all over the country. He's probably the biggest, greatest authority on that in New England, as far as I can see. So Emerson's a resource. What you're seeing here for graphics are interesting. These are Bangor, in the upper right is Bangor, a lithograph of the city in 1836. You can see the city is, the core of the city is well in place. And you can see ships in the water out in the harbor on the Penobscot and barges of logs being brought down. As you all know, I'm sure, Bangor was considered the lumber capital of the world. This is a place where great lumber was brought down from the north of us, all the way down here to mills and brewer in Bangor. It was dressed out and sized up for sale. The thing that's most interesting about the quality, and we're going to talk a little bit about the quality of materials that you find in historic buildings, is that many of our early buildings here in Bangor that have been lasting 200 years or so were built with really fine, high quality, first of all, lumber. The lumber that was cut was prime forest lumber. The annual rings on trees like that are very tight, and it's almost like a hardwood. You cut into it. I'm sure, Zach, you've cut into wood before, where you're just amazed at how tight the grain is on the wood. That lasts much longer than the wood that we're being provided today. It's much stronger. The image on the left is a really interesting graphic. If you've never seen this, it's called a panorama of Bangor. It was done in 1875. It's extremely accurate. We found, as a resource, it helps us to understand what buildings were in place in an earlier time period. You can download this from the Library of Congress. Just go to Library of Congress, type in Bangor Panorama in their map division, and you can download this beautiful hand-colored print. Amazing thing back then, you can see just a little piece of it here in the corner, is that ships were able to actually come all the way up to State Street. There was a turntable railroad crossing down here that would spin around, permitting access into this basin below State Street from there to the Penobscot River. So that's why you can see just in the corner of it right here, the customs house was located straight ahead, and that made sense at the time. This is a plan that everybody can get access to. You can download this map that shows Bangor's historic districts and Bangor's locally listed historic sites. There's 37 now. Actually, this goes up to 36, but there's been one more was added last year. So that has all of our 10 districts on it, and the 36 or 37 individual landmarks are located as well. Again, that's a great resource for people that want to know what's in and what's not in historic districts. The green zone that you see there is actually called the Bangor Center Revitalization Area. When a project is lucky enough to be in both of those, both the revitalization area and a historic district, they need to apply for a certificate of occupancy and what's called a facade review. Anything in the green needs to be reviewed for the facade. And Anya, did you want to speak about the parcel viewer?
Yes, I will. And just a minor correction, certificate of appropriateness is the term for going for historic districts.
What is it? Certificate of what?
Appropriateness. Yep.
Oh, what did I say?
Occupancy.
I'm sorry, certificate of appropriateness, yes.
Yeah. All right, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So you all may be familiar with this. If you're not, you can get to this map from the City of Bangor's website. It's under a link, I think it's City Maps. But on here, when you look for an individual parcel, you can see the information here about whether it's in a historic district or a historic site or not, or if it's in the facade district, which is the same thing as what Mike said is the revitalization area. They have two different names. Or alternatively, you can go down here to layers and you can turn on historic districts and historic sites. And then you can also turn on that facade district or revitalization area. So that way you can tell what's in, what's not. Just wanted to show you that real quick. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Yes. So early Bangor, here's the city of Bangor has always had a tight association with Boston. Boston subdividers basically came here and laid out in that upper left in 1801. We have Park Holland's 1801 survey. These are settlers' lots. And what I've highlighted in yellow, or yellowish green right here, at the confluence of the Kenduskeag and the Penobscot rivers is lot number 11. Lot number 11 is really important in that immediately thereafter, when the survey was done, these developers from Boston retained Charles Bulfinch, the architect, the renowned architect, to develop a plan, which he did. It's called Kenduskeag Point, Kenduskeag with a C, I think. Kenduskeag Point, and this is lot 11, transformed now into a subdivided, gridded series of parcels. Charles Bulfinch, if you'll recall, was the designer of the original Capitol, Washington, our Capitol building. He did Massachusetts State Building. He did our Maine State Building. Very important early American architect. So what he laid out here was a really sensible grid that we have in the beginning of the east side of the city. We don't have anything like that on the west side of the city, for all of you that know about intersecting Hammond Street and angles that are very much different. But you can see here in 1820 the continued layout of a grid system for streets, which is really sensible, and it's what we have in place today. So what he did here on lot 11, which was really pretty much that size right there, was to lay out what today is Exchange, Pine, Broadway, Oak Street, all of that series of streets were put in place. There was a bridge crossing here, and then it goes into mayhem on this medieval side of the city. So what we did from 1820 to 1843 or 1850 is a huge amount of development in Bangor. It really was accelerated in a great deal, and the street grid system that we had here in the beginning was extended out over a whole pattern of that east side of the city, excuse me. So in this map, we see the colored version here I've zoomed in on. It shows actually dwelling units constructed up and down, neighborhoods being built, and who owns them. Stetson Square was really that lower end of Broadway. As you crossed State Street and went down into Oak Street, there was a continuation of a park system, which is pretty much in place on Broadway, where we have the Esplanade that runs up the middle of it. So originally it was termed Stetson Square. That term hadn't been used in a while. But here is a park. Bangor is graced with a lot of wonderful park systems that really build wonderful neighborhoods, most of them within walking distance, but this is the beginning of a dedicated park. In this case, it's called the City Common in 1850, later called Chapin Park. That's basically where we see Chapin Park today. So we have a city that's evolving fast, and in Bangor's architectural history, we see buildings of great merit that are being built. St. John's Catholic School. Here's Broadway, the Esplanade that we see up through the middle of that. This is the beginnings of West Broadway. You know, of course, East and West had to have the same thing, right? So this is basically the layout of the street, wide right away, and the beginnings of houses being built on West Broadway. The complex known as the Bangor Waterworks, which has been restored in large place. We lost this building here, the shingle style building is gone, but most of it has been preserved and reused. A lot of the buildings in Bangor that we're going to be looking at that are historic actually have been through several lives. And this one is one that actually was vacant for many, many years, and finally is now Shaw House and apartment units for youth. The Bangor House was designed by Isaiah Rogers, a very important Boston architect. He did the Tremont Hotel in Boston, which is a very similar design to this. That's been restored largely, and the addition was built onto that recently. That's another building that had a successful rehabilitation, reuse. This is 6 State Street building on State Street in Bangor. Eastern Trust was in this floor level right here. I think it's interesting to notice that a lot of the downtown buildings had awnings to protect them from the sun. Kind of an interesting detail. It may come back someday. A lot of storefronts in Bangor that are facing the sun might warrant the use of those. And here we have a Unitarian vestry building that was restored back in around the year 2000. Merrill Bank was here at the time, and they were looking out at, if you recall that time period, the Penobscot Theater was in this building. And they did a great job of trying to keep ahead of it, but it was getting ahead of them. So their decision was either we watch it continue to come apart, or we become part of the restoration and saving this building. And they did. I worked on this project with the bank at the time. And back here, this is a connector that brings the floors, which are at different elevations, in line with them so they could be accessible. So the way that they were able to pull this off was, if you've ever been in this building since it was restored, is that they actually added an intermediate level within the auditorium, but did not bring it out so far. It's held back from the outside windows, which are these full heights, you know, beautiful archtop windows. So we're able to preserve all of that. A very successful, I think, preservation project in Bangor. This part of Bangor is looking really good. This church right here is struggling, as you've probably all seen. We probably need to find a way to help them get some money to restore that and keep it from coming apart anymore. So how many cities do you know that have a shingle-style water tower? Bangor is so unique that way. Here's this beautiful and important building we refer to as the standpipe. Has shingle-style eyebrow windows, this beautiful observation deck at the top. If anyone wants to take the trip up there a couple times a year, it's good exercise. These are parks. That one happens to be Broadway Park, I believe. We have in Bangor 2 parks that were designed by Frank Blaisdell, the landscape architect out of Boston. And this was actually constructed, and sometimes in the year you can actually still see the ghost patterns of some of those walkways in Broadway. The other park that he did, and this you may not recognize from the photograph, was Chapin Park. Chapin Park also had a pond, it had a fountain, it had all sorts of things that are absent today. But it's still a very important park to have to serve the neighborhoods around it. It brings the value of those all the way up. Views from the standpipe or up on Thomas Hill. This is the Giddings house that we have, and mansions that we've just recently done research on these buildings as well up on State Street. And I'll share that with you when we get into that a little bit more. So Bangor had a park here. It was Maplewood Park at the time. The auto racing and horse racing was going on. This is a fantastic photograph. And now it's referred to as Bass Park. This was the Bass family, as you probably know the history. Bangor also had some fantastically talented architects working here. We had Benjamin Dean, we had Charles Bryant, we had Wilfred Manser, George Orff. All of these architects produced really high quality, beautiful buildings. This one's up on Somerset Street. Again, the building that we're in today, the rotunda of the Bangor Public Library, was the result of hiring a very talented design firm out of Boston, Peabody and Stearns. Peabody and Stearns was the same firm at that time did the library building and the next door high school. So those buildings look a lot alike for a reason, because they use the same kind of neoclassical design details. Bangor, again, is known for its lumbering, and that's the Luther Pierce Memorial. River Drivers, just outside the door here. Lumbering produced some fantastic, as I say, the lumber, the quality that we had to build with was amazing. And that's why these buildings are lasting. They're going beyond 200 years. For those of you that might remember Freeze's downtown and W.T. Grant's buildings, both buildings that have been repurposed, both buildings have been saved and retained, and downtown buildings that may no longer need to be retail sales are now finding new uses, which is important. It's important to, rehabilitation really means about finding appropriate uses for and reusing buildings. Dow Air Force Base had a profound effect. Even though it was only here from the 40s till decommissioned in 1968, it still had a lot of impact on Bangor. One example is on 13th Street. What was once a GI Village is now Hayfords Park. Hayfords Park was once filled with one-story wood-framed duplex units for their corpsmen. So Bangor's had a really interesting history, and it continues on as we go today. So we look at different parts of the city. We see from West Market Square, the reuse of the Freezes building, the Penobscot Theater Company, which has done a fantastic job at the Opera House in restoring and maintaining that facade, which was in pretty tough shape. They built a new appropriate canopy at the front of the building, all been done to meet historic standard requirements. And Bob and Suzanne Kelly were involved in early restoration of what was called Bangor Furniture at the time. Their project was called the Courtyard. So this was one of those early examples of what you could do with buildings that looked pretty tough and didn't seem like they were going to have much of a future. So historic preservation benefits continued. They make the cities more walkable. Increased resale, foot traffic is increased. As we see downtown commercial improvements being made to the ground floors, and with more and more residential units being built upstairs, you have more people that are there to take advantage of a walkable experience in the downtown. It's important that we retain the city's character and the fabric, combined with walkability. It attracts visitors and new residents. Bangor is a place where people like to come and park and walk and see what it's all about. A good example is Lower Broadway. We have some really fine buildings down near John Bapt's. The brick buildings across from that are very early and very important. We'd like to get the city to extend brick sidewalks there for people that come and really want to recognize this as an early experience. So a lot of that is in the works. There's higher growth in property values. An example is in Philadelphia, the property values of designated homes in districts were 14.3 to 22.5% higher than non-historic homes. In Louisville, properties in local historic districts estimated to be worth $59,000 to $67,000 more than the comparable properties not in historic districts. Sustainability we're going to talk about in a moment. And you have more diverse housing types and opportunities in single, multifamily, and accessory dwelling units, which you've probably all been hearing a lot more about. This is big, and this is how projects get really implemented in the state of Maine. There's incentives, tax incentive programs that are both on the federal level and on the state level. The federal tax credit offer is 20% of a tax credit for a certified rehabilitation. And it says of certified historic structures. I'll define that in a little bit. It basically means a building that's eligible or listed on the National Register. With that, you could also get, for your project, a state historic rehabilitation tax credit of 25%. That can be applied when you get the federal tax credit. And an additional 10% is available and applied for affordable housing projects. Of a substantial rehabilitation credit that's greater than $250,000. So, 25% state tax credit, the rehabilitation of certified historic structures. They have what's called a small project rehabilitation credit. That's between $50,000 and $250,000. So this is dollar for dollar tax credit. It can be applied over a period of time or immediately. If you want some more information about this and tax credits, I would direct you to the Maine Historic Preservation Commission's website. They have a click down button that you can get a whole bunch of information about it. But it's been very successful in the state of Maine, very successful. So Maine's historic tax credit, between the years of 2009 and 19, that's a 10-year period, 106 historic projects were certified and online. This is amazing. Combined with those projects, that they generated $525 million in construction investment. Rehabilitated 3.6 million square feet of commercial and residential space. They created or preserved 1,911 housing units. 1,300 of those were affordable. Created 700 full-time equivalent jobs and added $166 million to local property tax rolls. One thing I want you all to be aware of, and maybe you can help to support it, is a legislation that's being considered now called LD 435. That's an act to expand the historic property rehabilitation tax credits. And most importantly, it will then apply to residential projects as well, which it never has. So I'll share with you, there's multiple copies of that here for anybody that wants more information about it. Looks like came out of committee, ought to pass. It's been tendered over and is going to be considered this year. So if you want to support this, 435, which I think is a really essential thing to rebuilding and maintaining historic preservation, please let your legislators know that this is an important bill to work on. Thank you. So here's a couple of examples of the application of the Maine rehabilitation tax credits. We have in the upper left, that's the courthouse projects on Hammond Street. Bangor Savings Bank on State Street took advantage of it. The Freeze's Assisted Living project did. Right next door is the Schoolhouse Apartments project. They took advantage of it. Hose 6 up on Cedar Street, Center Street.
Hose 5.
And Montgomery. is one of the earliest projects that I worked on in Bangor that was a tax credit project. And then we have 33 State Street in the Exchange Building, which is downtown. Zach, I think you had a hand in some of that work. And that continues to be a success story in Bangor. So, as well as the 2 Hammond Street project above it. So these are just a sampling of projects that have taken great advantage of the tax credit program. Anya, do you want to
Yep.
cover this?
So these aren't specific to historic rehabilitation, but these are funding opportunities that you can combine with the tax credits that Mike has talked about. So the first one is a program that we in the city came up with, the landlord weatherization program. Part of that is funded through our CDPG program, and then part of it is funded through our Climate Action Fund. And so we're providing up to $2,000 as a rebate to help with weatherizing and insulating rental units. And that's more so gap funding. So after any efficiency main rebates or other funding that you get for a project, we'll provide that additional funding. Half of the funding is income restricted. So if you have tenants that are below a certain income, they would get funding from that CDPG portion. We also have funding that's not income restricted, that's coming from the Climate Action Fund, so any income tenant rental unit can apply. So also just want to mention, if you're not aware already, Efficiency Maine has a ton of rebates for multifamily, commercial, and single-family residential, for insulation, HVAC systems, lighting, all kinds of things. So these are just things that can help you with the rehabilitation of your buildings.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, various ordinances and codes in the state and national application have historic buildings defined, and it can be one of these 3 things. Most normally it's number 1, it's either listed or certified as eligible for listing by the State Historic Preservation Office for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. In the National Register of Historic Places. So when that wants to be done, if you have a building and you want to have it considered for listing or being eligible, you need to make contact with the state office. I'm not sure what that was. We got a squirrel in here. Radiator. So most typically what happens is we'll take a project to the State Historic Preservation Officer. That's Kirk Money now. Earl Shuttleworth is now finally retired, and he will make a determination. It usually takes about a month for that to happen. You'll want to gather up or work with the architect to gather up data on the building, and I'll share with you where a lot of this information is available right now for you to use. It also can be determined as a historic under an applicable state or local law, or certified as contributing resource within a National Register designated historic district. So you saw Bangor had 10 districts with multiple buildings in it. Those are all considered historic buildings as defined. So again, when they talk about a certified rehabilitation, that has to be, certified rehabilitation means it's done to the Secretary of this Interior standards, and that you're paying attention to the historic aspects of it. You basically have to put a plan together, and that's paperwork that has to define what you're going to be doing to the project and what the benefit is. So here's a wonderful resource. There's a lot of resources available for historic preservation. These are just some of them. Actually, your local HPC, the Historic Preservation Commission in Bangor, is available. You can meet with them and have a preliminary discussion about your project or what you need to gather together to get an approval from them. Bangor Historical Society, of which I'm a board member, is a fantastic resource. They have a lot of historic photography in Bangor. You could, as does the Bangor Public Library, but you could call Matt Bishop over there, and Matt Bishop will help you out to locate what it is you're after. And he does a fantastic job as a curator and kind of our head of operations. Bangor Public Library, as I said, they have resources here that are vast. The Maine Historic Preservation Office in Augusta, if it's worth a contact and you want to find something out about a building, they keep files on many, many historic buildings in the state of Maine that you may want to check with them. There's a separate group called Maine Preservation. That's not to be confused with the MHPC office in Augusta. These folks are in Yarmouth. They're basically a group that promotes and advocates for historic preservation. They have multiple programs. You may be familiar with them. They are also a great resource to find funding and grant money for your project. The National Park Service continues to be a great resource. And one of the things that they offer, you see on the left, is what's called a preservation brief. There's now 51 of those available for you to download. They talk about everything that you could ever imagine for restoring and maintaining historic properties. This one happens to be preservation brief number 11 on rehabilitating historic storefronts. That really would apply to downtown buildings. They'll tell you what's important, what you should do, what you shouldn't do. All of that is available for download. And again, there's 51 of those that's available. Gross Smart Maine, I should also mention, they have sensible development plans that are available and examples of what is going on around the state of Maine. So this is if you've not heard of Sanborn insurance maps, these were fire insurance maps that were done about every 5 years or so. They would come starting in Bangor around 1884, I think, and running to about 1914 or so, at least after the fire. So they're accurate layouts of buildings in the downtown. What you're seeing here is basically West Market Square, which would be the area right here. This is West Market. Pickering Square was back here. This is the Curve building that you see there today. So the pink colored buildings were basically masonry. Those were masonry buildings, brick usually. And the yellow were frame buildings. So not all of those exist today, but they're still a great resource. You see evolution of what happened in Bangor from that period, 1884 to about 1914, especially after the Great Fire. Very helpful. Bangor took over the city hall that they're in today and left this building. It didn't work for them anymore. Great photography like this is available through the Bangor Historical Society. So don't hesitate to contact them to see what they can do for you to find out.
And the Sanborn maps are also available through the Bangor Library in Orono. They're online. The Library of Congress also has copies. There's also copies of the actual books downstairs you can go through. They also have some more later updates as well, I believe, through the 1950s.
Thank you, Emerson. That's a good way to get those. The ones in library downstairs, actually, they would take over. As things evolve, they would cut sections out of later maps and stick them over some others. So, but this, as Emerson mentioned, the University of Maine Special Collections, you can do that, download these right online. Great resource, great resource. So I should mention that also in downtowns like Bangor, you may have considerations for flood zones. That's FEMA. But the Secretary of the Interior standards also have a section about guidelines for flood adaptation for rehabilitating historic buildings. So we have some of that. What you're seeing in the pink here is a 500-year floodplain, and the blue is a 100-year floodplain. Is that the current FEMA map?
Yeah.
So that is something to be considered. It does touch into some of our buildings in the downtown. It requires a little special attention. This is a great resource you can download. It's about a 50 or 60 page document, and it's basically on guidelines on sustainability. Sustainability for rehabilitating historic buildings. So sustainability goes a long way. As you can see, there's the Washington Monument in the background of this photograph, and you can see a green roof, what was considered a green roof today. So that, whether that's been done on a historic building, I don't know. But I would recommend that if you're going to consider that for historic buildings, flat roof, you have a structural engineer maybe take a look at it. So Richard Moe was the past president of the National Trust, and he had a quote which I think is wonderful. He said, "Because historic preservation involves the conservation of energy and natural resources, it is really the greenest of the building arts." And I absolutely agree with that. Preserve these buildings. Again, this is Unitarian Church Vestry. It's a building that, again, the greenest building is the one that's already built. chance to save these buildings even if they're in tough shape. 43% of the US carbon emissions are from the construction and operation of buildings. And the carbon released constructing a 50,000 square foot building is equal to driving a car 2.8 million miles. And that's in bad weather, so like snowy conditions. So what we call embodied energy is really represents the energy for putting that building together initially. That's built in. As soon as you start to look at demolition or removal of that, you've escaped what is the value of embodied energy in the building. This happens to be upstairs at Nuremberg Hall. That was another tax credit project. Preservation reduces landfill waste, 45 million tons in 24. Historic downtowns and neighborhoods are walkable. This is a really important thing that we'll speak about later. It reduces sprawl when you look at restoring city urban cores and associated infrastructure costs. That's when you build outside of the city, especially new construction, you have to extend your sewer, water, electrical, and all of those utilities to it, whereas the systems are in place to a tighter degree in the urban cores. And buildings in 1920s buildings were more energy efficient than most buildings that were constructed from 1920 to 2000. So the reason is that pre-1920, masonry walls, like in this building, were substantially thick. This was probably a 24-inch thick masonry wall outside of lath and plaster. Substantial. So sustainability, do you want to speak a little about that?
Just wanted to talk a little bit about this term called deconstruction. It's something that people in historic preservation, but also sustainability circles are trying to get people to think more about. So instead of demolishing a building, looking at carefully kind of deconstructing it, taking it apart, and reusing as many of those materials as you can. And this has a lot of benefits. One of those is that it increases historic material availability. We have a big issue with that when people do want to do a historic preservation project. We don't have a lot of those historic materials available. So if we can carefully kind of deconstruct our current historic buildings, that would help with that issue. As Mike talked about, it reduces the environmental footprint if you can deconstruct and reuse those materials, because we do have so many building materials ending up in a landfill. So this reduces the need to go out and get new stuff. It also creates a lot more jobs than demolition. I think the statistic is it creates, for every one job in demolition, deconstruction creates 4 jobs. So it's a really big economic booster. And it also protects public health. So, you know, a lot of older buildings, they do have things like lead and asbestos and things like that. So when you demolish them, you're kind of putting that all up in the air versus deconstructing it. You can kind of prevent that from being released to the neighborhood. So it's just a concept that we're wanting people to think more about. You know, if you can incorporate that into a project, that's really great. So just something to consider.
Good. An example of reusing, deconstructing and reusing existing materials is the Augusta. Augusta built a new Hannaford's. Hannaford's built in Augusta up near where Coney High School was, behind that. And that building basically reused big timbers to do a canopy in the front of the store. That was a LEED Platinum project, which is the highest level of sustainability measuring. They used timbers from a mill building that had come down that couldn't be saved. So next time you're in Augusta, take a peek or ride by that Hannaford's and take a look at that beautiful, high-quality lumber that was able to be reused. There's a main downtown center project, which is, as I understand now, Bangor may be looking to become a Main Street program. That's through the main downtown center. A couple years ago, we worked on a project with them called Greening Your Downtowns, and that's still available if you want to go to their website. By the way, this PDF will be available to anybody who wants it at the end of today. If you want to leave me your card or make a list or give me your email address, I'll be happy to forward the PDF.
And we'll post it on the city's website along with the recording. I'm recording on my phone, so.
Thank you. So some of the things that were considered in greener downtowns were things like maybe considering trellises. They don't have to be attached to a building, but if you need to shade a masonry building, there may be landscaping or trellises or other ideas that can be used to do that. We talked about high efficiency lighting in your downtown and the use of awnings to protect and reduce solar gain on on those buildings that have south exposures or sunny exposures. Downtown Bangor, if you look at a lot of the old downtown photographs, showed buildings, storefronts with deep awnings that came out over the sidewalk. They don't necessarily have to be that deep, but awnings can be a beautiful detail to be added to a historic building that bring attention to it and identify the building. So this is available to you as well, the resource. This was a really important document. There was a Maine Preservation put out a few years ago called Guidelines to Improving Energy Efficiency in Historic Buildings, and it covers a whole host of things. I'm not going to list them all here, but what it does is gives you a strategy and examples of what to do, and again, more especially what not to do. Because when moisture gets trapped in a poorly insulated or a poorly conceived wall system, it can be detrimental to the construction that's there. So this is available for download as well at Maine Preservation site. It was a really important document put out. Provisions for historic buildings that we have in Maine, what's called the MUBEC, that's the Maine Uniform Building and Energy Code that applies to the entire state of Maine. It's a group of various codes that apply to new buildings, and within the last 10 years, they've added one called the International Existing Building Code. That's a very important document because it recognizes historic buildings, and it recognizes the need to preserve those parts of these buildings that speak about how important the detailing was of these places. Here's a couple of examples of how the International Existing Building Code can be used to save and preserve aspects of a building. The photo on the left is actually the old courthouse building. It allowed us to put closures and maintain a transom panel above the door and to add exit devices on the door and new hardware that met both historic requirements and code requirements for a building like that, which is an assembly building. The photo in the middle is actually the Nichols Block in downtown Bangor on Exchange Street, probably my favorite building that survived the fire actually, 1888 I think. Beautiful block building with arched windows. The interior doors in the corridors had transom lights above them. This code allows us to preserve those transom lights. Otherwise, those would have been covered up and had to be made fire protective along the corridor. And in the center of that photograph is actually the detailing of the staircase going up to the upper floors in that building. We're allowed to retain those even though they didn't meet the strict requirements of the new building codes for height and gripability of the handrails. That was able to be preserved. So very important existing building code that can be referred to. That can be downloaded too, by the way, if you really want some nighttime reading. That's a good one that is available through the Bureau of Standards, Technical Standards in Augusta. This is really interesting. You may be aware of it, but if you're not, I hope you take advantage of it. The library here actually has scanned in many of the old assessor's records in Bangor. So what you're seeing here is actually assessor's records that usually began in the 1930s, and information gets added to them over the years. Some of them ran through to the 50s and 60s. This particular house is on Pine Street, I believe. An example of a pattern book house. And it shows maybe the owner what the building looked like originally or before it was modified. And it's been quite modified over time. Not surprising. So this is available. You need to call the library's reference department and ask for a specific address. And if they don't have it scanned in, they usually make time to scan that document in for you. Very valuable. So in terms of historic preservation and how it came nationally and how it came to the state of Maine and then again locally, in 1966, the National Preservation Act was passed. That's federal requirements for preserving historic buildings. And shortly thereafter, in 1971, Maine Historic Preservation Commission was formed. James Mundy, I think, was the first state historic preservation officer, and Earl Shuttleworth after that. So in 1973, just a few years thereafter, 73 and 74, the first districts in Bangor were created. The Broadway Historic District and the 1974 Mount Hope Historic District, which is generally the Mount Hope Cemetery properties. In 75, Historic Resources Inventory, that's what you see on the left here, with the illustration on the front, was produced by Earl Shuttleworth. And the Historic Resources Inventory began at that time. Those inventories continue on to this day, with the commission asking for new information on the conditions of existing buildings. So in 1977, shortly thereafter, Bangor's Historic Preservation Ordinance was created. Probably the first, we think maybe the first in the state of Maine. Well ahead of Portland, yay. So Bangor currently has 10 certified historic districts, which we saw in that graphic, and 6 are National Register listed, and 37 historic landmarks. That continues to grow as our office goes out and does more and more inventory work, like we've finished. This is phase 4 we're into now, four phases. Phase 4 basically makes recommendations like other ones did previously on extending national and local districts to cover other neighborhoods. We did the tree streets in phase 3, I believe.
Phase 4.
Phase 4.
Yeah.
Phase 4.
Phase
We looked up at State Street, was part of that, the mansions along State Street. So that work continues. The inventories continue, and MHPC will support that to Bangor because we're a CLG. I'll talk about
And
that.
actually, just on the resources that you showed there, the 1975 one is available through the University of Southern Maine. That's available online through their collections. The 1980s ones are available downstairs below us in the Bangor room. The one work that done by Deborah Thompson. And then the more recent ones are available through the Maine Historic Preservation Commission office. And we found through their Karma viewer. We'll talk more about
Yeah.
that.
Carmen's been.
We also have it in the city's files too, so, yeah.
Thank you, guys. So Bangor, again, one of the first municipalities to have a commission. RHPC was established around the time of urban renewal. We're not going to talk much about that today. There are loss of many historic buildings. But the good news is that the buildings that are left are in fine condition, and they really represent an important statement about Bangor's history. So we still have reference to those buildings at that time, which is important. We're recognized as a leader in historic preservation in the state of Maine, Bangor's HPC, and recognized as a certified local government. This is an important thing. CLGs are a national program that basically recognizes historic preservation commissions of a certain stature and capability. That makes grants, technical assistance, and training available. This annual training is taken by the commission as well to keep them current. So basically reading right out of the ordinance in Bangor, the ordinance says the Historic Preservation Commission shall protect historic landmarks, historic sites, and historic districts by the issuance of certificates of appropriateness, thank you, approvals of minor alteration or revision, and staff approvals. And Bangor's comprehensive plan a couple years ago stated in several sections under historic preservation that goal 10 was to protect and promote the city's history and culture while supporting redevelopment and adaptive reuse of historically significant and unique structures in a way that respects the neighborhood, respects the historic and architectural integrity of the city's downtown and neighborhoods. So I think the key word there is adaptive reuse. We're seeing adaptive reuse of historic buildings all over the state of Maine. And sometimes that's what it's going to take to maybe increase affordable housing, to increase opportunities for young couples to find places to live in the downtowns. So adaptive reuse is a key term. Emerson just mentioned Karma. Karma is the Cultural Architectural Resource Management Archive. It was set up by the state of Maine, and the work that we do for the city when we inventory and do analysis of the buildings and the data that we collect for them is all put into Karma forms. Karma exists, you can access that through NHPC's website. You go to a little button that says Others, and it'll list down Karma. When you click on Karma, it brings up the entire state of Maine. You can zoom in on Bangor, and what you're going to see is something like a graphic like this on the right, which basically keys in on the buildings, in this case on Broadway and adjacent neighborhoods. The data that you're going to pull up for each one of those, when you put a little tack on it, when you zoom into a particular property, is going to bring up something with data on it that looks much like this on the left, which records the building's history, date of construction, type of materials, the architectural style, records all sorts of great information, the designer, if there was an architect involved, and other pertinent information about the property. Karma is very important and a great resource. The state DOT is actually the ones who created it. It was basically done in a way so that it could tell them when they were encroaching or potentially encroaching on historic neighborhoods with the road systems and right-of-ways. So again, you'll go to this Karma map, bring up something like this in Bangor. You have to go by the legend. Our historic districts, eligible buildings, and listed buildings are all identified. And the ones that maybe say unknown are maybe potentially being considered for eligibility. So we can see Brewer, even across the way in Brewer, some buildings have been inventoried, and that information is available. But you'll see the entire state of Maine when you pull up the Karma data form. Is there something you wanted to speak about on that? No?
No.
Good, okay. Bangor has a city ordinance, the Land Development Ordinance, Chapter 148 is Historic Preservation. I think that's available for anybody to download and look at. We basically, the Historic Preservation Commission uses the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. We've seen some documents that come from the Secretary of the Interior. That's through the National Park Service. And the evaluation standards that they use, 148-9, is for new buildings and structures in historic districts. So, some examples requiring a certificate of appropriateness would include new windows in a building, changing materials for things like siding or roof, etc., removal or alteration of character-defining features. We'll talk a little bit more about what character-defining features are. You want to review that?
Yes. Just want to clarify, should have put it on the previous slide, but when it comes to new windows, if you are completely matching what's there in terms of materials and the way it looks, that is exempt from permitting. But typically when we do get new window applications, they are changing the materials and they're changing things a little bit, so those do often have to go to the commission. And I will show you how to get to our ordinance in just a second, but just to go over the permitting requirements. So when you do a major alteration, like Mike said, if you're changing the siding or the roof materials, things like that, new construction or demolition, you have to submit for a certificate of appropriateness, we call it a COA, from the Historic Preservation Commission. So we do recommend that people do call us first, just to talk through things before they submit an application or when you're submitting an application, just to make sure that, you incorporate things that are likely to get approved, or, talk about any other materials that you need to submit and things like that, just so we can give you some more guidance. We do have a form online, and I can show you where that's at too, a historic preservation application. We ask that you submit some supporting documents like pictures of what's there now, the material or the items that you're putting in, like your new windows, things like that. And then there's also a very small fee for minor revisions. It's $30 for new applications. For certificates of appropriateness, it's $55, give or take. And the Historic Preservation Commission, they meet once a month on the second Thursday of every month. And we do ask that people get in their applications about 2 weeks before the next meeting, so we have time to send it to Mike. Mike here reviews those applications. He provides a memo with any recommended changes, kind of goes over the application, and then we ask applicants to respond to that memo you know, with any questions that he had, and they can either provide that to us in writing or they can provide it at the meeting. So when it does go to the commission votes on whether the project meets the standards in chapter 148. They'll go and vote, you know, standard by standard. And they also, forgot to mention on here, they, like Mike had mentioned earlier, they also look at things that are in the facade district. That's called design review. Sometimes there are buildings, especially around the waterfront, there's buildings that are in the facade district, but they're not in the historic district. They still have to go to the commission for major alterations to get that design review. And I'll show you those standards as well. There are some changes, very minor changes, that can just be reviewed by staff and the chair of the commission. It's just me, the code enforcement officer, and the chair. Things like signs, all signs are a minor revision. Often things that aren't visible from the street can be a minor revision. Things like heat pumps, things like that. Also, some things are exempt, like paint color in historic districts, maintenance, interior changes, and again, if you're completely matching what's there in terms of materials and what it looks like, then that is also exempt. As far as paint color goes, I want to mention, if it is in the facade district, paint color still gets reviewed. And I will talk a little bit later about our land development code update. We're going to be taking a closer look at the facade district and talking about how that might change in the future to give people more flexibility. So I did just want to show you our ordinance real quick. So you can get to the code from the main page here if you go to your government, code of ordinances. And the revitalization area standards are here in chapter 71. And generally what this district is for is more so, because a lot of the buildings in this district somewhat are not historic, this looks more so at, you know, the design of the facade and how does it fit in with surrounding buildings and things like that. So the commission would go over these standards overview here. And then you can also find chapter 148 here. And they will go over these evaluation standards, 148-9. Often, not all of these are applicable to a particular project. They'll go over which ones are applicable and which aren't. And we don't often have new construction or demolition, but there are standards in here for that. And there are also some, these are kind of hard to meet, but there are stipulations in here for hardship or exceptional circumstances, if that applies. So yeah, I think that was everything I was going to go over on that. All right.
Thank you.
Oh, it's the current slide. Sorry.
That's
Let me
okay.
get back here.
We'll get it back. What I thought I'd do is, it's about 11:30 now, if it's okay, I can run to 12 noon. We can have lunch. And then maybe just a brief amount of material I could review after that with you, just to make sure everyone stays awake. So, I'm not going to go over it, but again, this is available for you all in a PDF form. But in essence, it talks about new additions, exterior alterations, or related new construction. These are the sort of requirements where it gets to talking about compatibility of the massing and the size and scale that I'd like to review with you. Do you want to review this one, or I can cover this?
Yeah, just kind of, it's kind of related to what I was talking about before with new windows. We do get a lot of applications for new windows, and oftentimes those are because the current windows are drafty, not very energy efficient, and things like that. And so we kind of just wanted to go over like that there are other options besides replacing the windows, because often those window replacement applications can be hard to get HPC approval for, because people, want to go to vinyl windows and things like that. So just kind of wanted to talk about some alternatives. There are, storm windows or window inserts that you can put in. They would not need HPC approval, but they would really help a lot with that draftiness without replacing the window. And there are types that can open to meet those egress requirements. I know that can be a code issue sometimes. And they're often much, much cheaper than having new windows. And just kind of going over the savings on utility costs from new windows, that's often not as high as people actually think they are. So just for an example here, if you're spending $120 a month on utilities, you might expect a 15% savings, give or take, from new windows, roughly $18 per month. So if you're spending $10,000 on those windows, it would take 46 years to break even. So the ROI on that utility cost is often not that high. So kind of just want to put those concepts out there for people to think about when you're considering that.
Thanks. Yeah. So I used the term character defining feature earlier. That's a key point in preservation review. Buildings all have what we would consider essential character defining features in things like the massing of the building, the detailing of the building, how the windows are shaped, the solids and voids of the building, solids being walls and voids being windows. All of that goes together to define the character of the building. When character defining features are considered for modification, that's oftentimes a real struggle through the commission to get. So look at buildings, the essential physical and visual aspects of it define the character of the place. I think you'd all know that. If we remember the slide of the standpipe, which has a granite base below it, if somebody was coming to us saying, the commission, and saying, I'd like to change that to vinyl clapboards or something. Probably the statement would be that the stone base is an important character defining feature of that place. You can almost look at any of these important buildings and see what those things are. Certified local government we talked about, CLG. Historic context is sometimes a term that's used in ordinances. They're talking about how it fits to the context of the rest of the neighborhood. Contributing or non-contributing, even in some of our districts that we've set up, not all of the buildings are contributing to the historic district. So when it's a non-contributing structure, they're identified as such. Just means that that building didn't raise to the level of the other buildings around it. So they're normally built of these districts with contributing and non-contributing buildings. To be eligible for listing, we talked about going through the State Historic Preservation Office for that. And historical significance is another term that's like context. What is the significance of this building and how important is it to be restored? The rehabilitation oftentimes means a change in use or restoring a building to a type of construction that can support either continued use or alternate uses, occupancies. The window that you see on the right is all detailed up, and oftentimes when, as Anya mentioned, when windows come to the commission, maybe the most key thing that they're looking to satisfy is that the frame and the sash of the window, that's the frame and the sash of the window that are being replaced, that are being, maybe the new window that's being considered for that placement is not much different than the dimensions of what's there now. So it's called retaining the glass area. So oftentimes we see vinyl windows with a real big chunky frame and a real big chunky sash. And before you know it, you've lost what was a really delicate perimeter to something that's not going to match what was there previously. That's one of the biggest issues with them. The other one is the muntins. The muntins are the grill, if you will, right here on the outside. The commission prefers that they be what's called a putty glazed look. So it looks, if it's just an applied grill, that it looks like it's a putty glazed, replacing what was there previously. So if you look around at sashes, like maybe even this window up here that we have, you see that the muntins are fairly narrow, and the sashes are fairly tight, and they actually included in the frame a bit. So that's a modern detail, but it's if you're replacing that with a vinyl window, you'd be coming in on all sides, probably 4 to 5 inches vast difference in the look of that. So character defining features again on the property. The ordinance says that the removal of historic materials or alterations of features and spaces that characterize a property shall be avoided. This happens to be a house up on Broadway, the Strickland House, where Vance Gray's office was. Our office used to be there. And so we took a photo of this. They were doing a really fine job in matching and actually using mahogany in this case because it will last longer and it's more decay resistant. They were matching the precise dimensions of the base of these columns, which had to be replaced. So that would be considered a character defining feature. So I'm going to breeze through these, but when they talk about new buildings going into a neighborhood, these are the things that they're going to be looking at. And it starts with the building height, and it shows you what to do and what not to do. So oftentimes these graphics have something that shows you what's appropriate and what isn't. The building scale and proportion on the right, they're talking about something that breaks the massing of the building down so that it seems to fit better into the neighborhood rather than a big bulky shape. The rhythm and relationship of solids and voids, what that means is walls and windows. So windows are seen as the voids on the facade, and the solids are the walls around it. So the pattern of those solids and voids is an important thing to consider. Rhythm and relationship of the building to the open space, that's maintaining side yard setbacks and front yard setbacks. Rhythm and relationship of entrances and porch projections. This is important, and if you look at this graphic over here, this is actually Maple Street in Bangor. And you see how very consistent all of the setbacks are of the houses. And you see that when you ride down there. So if one of those houses was pulled way back, it would feel distinctly different, maybe inappropriate. And roof shapes, trying to be considerate about the materials and the textures of the facade and the roof shapes of the building. And the directional expression, whether it's a vertical building or horizontal. We actually have a lot of buildings down in the First Street area that look like this, kind of the Second Empire building. And what's happened lately, you hear discussions about accessory dwelling units, what maybe at an earlier time were considered like mother-in-law apartments or other things that could begin to benefit and increase the densities of housing in the city. This graphic really shows something interesting. The change in the household sizes from 1940 to 2016, you can see it's a steady straight decline. So households are much smaller than they were. We all probably have experienced that. And ADUs are something that the state is considering, and Bangor is actually reinforcing the opportunities for accessory dwelling units to be used. And so they have standards about that, which I think are available through the city's website. And you want to speak about that?
Yeah, just from a zoning perspective, kind of going further on what Mike said, the state has made a lot of legislation lately to make it easier to build an ADU, to kind of reduce those permitting requirements. We have also, along with the state, reduced our requirements for ADUs. Just want to go back real quick. So one of the main restrictions on an ADU currently with zoning is that it is, the maximum size is 1,000 square feet or 50% of the primary dwelling, whichever is less. There's not too many other requirements really, but currently they are allowed on any lot with a single family home. Per the state legislation that just recently passed, LE 1829, we are working on changes that will allow them on any residential lot. They are exempt from lot area or density requirements. So, you know, if you're in URD 1, Urban Residence 1 district, and you have a 5,000 square foot lot with a single family home, you can do an ADU. Whereas if it were a full unit, you would have to go to URD 2. There's no extra off-street parking required. They do have to meet the setbacks and dimensional requirements of the primary dwelling, with some exceptions in like URD 1 and URD 2. There's a lower side and rear setback. I think it's 5 feet. And then also, if an ADU is in the principal dwelling below finished grade, it has to have a daylight entry. But besides those requirements, there's really not much else. We have reduced those over the years.
So when they're in a historic district, they would also have to come to the commission?
Yes, for new construction, it would go to the commission.
So as you can see here, ADUs come in various forms. In this case, there was an ADU that was created or installed above a garage at this residence. And I'd like to save our review of architectural styles till after lunch, if that's okay. Everybody good with that?
Since our lunch isn't here yet, I just want to
I think
open
we
it up. Sorry, I just want to open it up to any questions.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
go ahead.
So, as a realtor, for instance, we're constantly looking at tax maps and stuff, and looking at the zoning. I've sold some houses that are older, but I never have sold a home that I believe was considered historic. But now I'm questioning if it's in a historic zone, but it might not be conforming. Are there ways to verify if the home you're selling
Is historic, whether it is?
yeah.
Well, the parcel map that we reviewed, when you go to the city parcel map, the first tab that comes up on the property will indicate, if you scroll down, whether it's historic as a landmark or historic in a district.
Oh, perfect. So
Yeah.
it's
That's right there,
Yeah,
perfect. No
every time.
questions.
yeah. Or you can pull up those layers again
Or the-
for historic
Right, I was
districts.
like, boy, I have to do a lot of these layers now.
Yeah.
And actually, she was also mentioning the non-conforming, because you mentioned that
Yeah.
earlier. And that actually, we see a lot more in like the National Register nomination forms. You can find those actually through the National Park I think the National Park
Yeah, for
Service.
Park Service.
And those will list the buildings that were considered non-contributing at the time of listing. But that's the National Register more than the local listings we're talking about here.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just wanted to clarify, I didn't mention earlier, if it's on the National Register but it's not locally listed, it doesn't go to the commission. Only things that are on our local list
Right.
goes to the commission. And that layer that I talked about, that's all locally listed stuff. But I really think there's only one thing that is on the National Register not locally listed, and I think that's the Mount Hope Cemetery. Everything else should match up, so,
Pretty closely. Broadway's slightly different.
okay, yeah,
National Register to local district, but
yeah.
that information should be right available, a couple of clicks of the computer. Well, until lunch gets here, if it's okay, I'll start into review of house architectural styles in Bangor.
Were there other questions before we?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, other questions? Thank you, you guys are a great audience, by the way. So, we'll start with the colonial period, and we're gonna run from Bangor's house styles from about the 1700s, 1760s, up to the 1930s. There were other styles after that, so common in the area like Fairmount Park and other places, is a colonial revival style that is not gonna be reviewed today. You all know what those Bangor boxes look like, so I'm not gonna cover that. So examples in Bangor of colonial and federal houses. This is the Bruce House on the left, which is on Bruce Road, by the way. Amazing. It's an example of what we call a 5-bay or 5-rank. 5-bay is the windows, counting the openings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This was at the time and continues to today to be one of the most popular house styles in America, the colonial house. Colonial houses normally, if they were done in the colonial period before 1820, had chimneys that were interior of the outside walls, as opposed to the photograph of the house on the right. So here we see a frame house. There could be frame or brick, but oftentimes they were framed in the colonial period. The Cape Cod is also a house that belongs to the colonial period. And we're very, very much duplicated up and down all over New England. So the house on the right transitions into another style, a little bit later style, called federal. Once we became a nation, the styles of buildings began to change, and the reference to federal is about that period where we did become, went away from being a colony. So you see in this house, over the entrance door, an arch development of a fan light or an arched development of a wood fan, and side lights that articulate the door. So that's a classic example of federal style. They sometimes had swags that were built in. They sometimes had other detailing between the windows at the floor level. And this house is a bit confusing in that John Hamm at this house built that bay that you see on the gable end years later. So that was not part of the original house. Greek Revival is probably one of the most important styles in Bangor, and it's all over the city. And there's some very good examples of Greek Revival in Bangor. What they did in Greek Revival was to develop something that was patterned after a Greek temple. So what they're looking to do is they have a strong pediment shape like this. Then they have a frieze board. This all becomes what's called the architrave, which carries around and details the soffit and the rake of the house. So it looks very much like a Greek temple. The porticos that you see on the front, this, by the way, is from a book. If you're interested in really studying more about house styles, this is from a book called The Guide to American Houses by Virginia McAllister. That's where all these graphics came from. Fantastic book. So you'll see maybe a portico with columns, and these are columns that are based on classical architecture. This happens to be a painted house, the George Brown house up on High Street in Bangor. This is a lonely building house that used to be in a neighborhood. He's kind of wondering what happened to the rest of the neighborhood at this point. Changes happen. This is the Zebulon Smith house. It's what's called a temple front Greek Revival house, because it's really designed to look most like the front temple. So you can see, if you look closely, you can see that this is a brick house. The entire house is brick, but the front and all the detailing that's done on the front facade is done in wood. And that's what Bangor was good at. Bangor had mills like Morse's Mill that produced beautiful detailed trim pieces. And they're really trying to tell the world that wood can make a fantastic front facade of a Greek Revival building. So one transition, sometimes we transition from one style to another, and the previous style of federal is somewhat apparent in this federal style arch window in the top. So the pediment supported by columns, and that's called a 3-day, because you count between them, 1, 2, 3. That's a 3-day temple front Greek Revival house. In Bangor, we have some other wonderful examples. This is the Nathaniel Hatch house on the right, which is on Court Street. And the thing that I really love to notice, this was designed by Charles Bryant, very important architect in American history. Interesting guy. The Flight of the Grand Eagle is a book that's written about him, if you want to find out more. But when he was in Bangor, he was an architect and was doing lovely work like this. One of his signatures is, you'll see these organic patterns. Sometimes you'll see a column that has a wreath above it on a house. That may well be a Charles Bryant house. But the thing that really kills me about this house is, first of all, the enormity of the scale of it. And also, if you see these columns on the front gable, you also see in the back they have the same thing. So it was really an ornate and beautiful house for a special person. This is the Alvin Haynes house up on Highland Avenue. And what the architect did here is really clever. I just have to point it out to you because I think it's so cool. So these windows are not symmetrical. Most everything in a Greek Revival house is quite symmetrical. But what he does is he gets your attention here. He gets your attention with balanced colonnade on two sides of the house. So it feels balanced, even though these windows are running amok and not paying attention to the strict styles of it. The other thing to notice on this house, if you look closely, that's a stepped gable. I've only seen that on one other building in this area. But a stepped gable is just a way of cutting granite to be a little bit more ornate. And in Bangor, we had, again, access to prime wood, the highest quality wood you could ever imagine. We had access to brick manufacturing in Brewer, brick manufacturing in Bangor. Over where the Dowdy School is today was a large brick pit. We had great brick, and we had slate from Monson, black slate, and we had granite from down the road in Frankfurt. So those four materials went together to make some really substantial houses that are lasting hundreds of years. This is a really important house in Bangor. Charles Bryant designed here as well. And you see his signature here with a wreath over the column. This is a double house. Bangor has a fair amount of double houses. which mean that it's exactly the same on each half, just flipped, just mirrored. So here's an entry door, and here's an entry door into another. So Kent and Cutting, I don't know if they lived there at the same time, but they could have. And you see here also examples of wrought iron rails. This is a wrought iron rail up here. A lot of houses in Bangor gave up their beautiful ornate rail work in the front yards up and down Broadway and some of the classic houses for the war effort, so that metal. So you still may sometimes see granite piers without any metal elements between them. This is an important house. In Bangor, up on Union Street, at corner Union and High, we have the Thomas A. Hill House. This was designed by Richard Upjohn, one of the first houses he designed in America in 1835. He did the Farrer Mansion right across the street. Both were Greek Revival. These dormers that you see here, Flemish dormers they're called, were added at a later period, so try to ignore that when you look at it. But this is beautiful. It has a portico that runs on 3 sides of the house. Really makes the house, which is fairly small, look a great deal grander and larger. The Historical Society is now, you may be aware, of restoring the portico on the back and the side towards High Street. As phase 1 and phase 2 will be the front as well. So if you look at that photograph in the lower right, you can see the granite planks that basically Upjohn set as a walkway on the portico. Those are all had come undone from their connection. So foundations for them have to be rebuilt. This is a good example of Gothic revival. Gothic revival is, there's a couple of examples. It's often seen in churches. But in this case, this was the carriage house to the Cliff Cottage, which was next door to this. This was physically moved from down at a lower adjacent neighbor building, back of the lot, picked up and physically moved up here to the front. So next time you go by there, you can see that, and they even kept the colors the same between the Cliff House, which is dominantly gray, and this one being Dr. Wood's house today. So in that book that I mentioned, the Guide to American Houses, you'll see all sorts of things that you might encounter in each particular style. And in this case, it's about the pointed window. It's about points, and points accentuated with finials, that sort of thing. It's a beautiful style, and what we call barge boards or birch boards or other things is basically what you'll find in a house like this, a Gothic Revival house. In Bangor, the Jenkins house that you see on the right was actually threatened for demolition. I think it was on Adams Street in Bangor. And Bob and Suzanne Kelly said, no, we're going to save this place. So they did. They physically picked that house up, moved it about 2 blocks to Pine Street, and set it down on a new foundation. So it's an incredible story of saving a place, going to that degree. And the thing that's cool about this house is, even though the windows aren't pointed, the trim panels above it are pointed. So it really makes a nice statement about Gothic Revival. And this is the Carr Wing House, which is across from the hospital. We don't know what the future of that is. Actually, Zach and I spent some time going through that to help the hospital understand what needs to be done to save it. This was a really important property when the Wings owned it, and their property went all the way over to Garland Street, and I think to Otis Street, and they actually had landscapes here that were just amazing, from what I've heard. So let's say a prayer for that house. The style called Italianate is a really interesting one. This is up on Highland Street. This is actually Reese Perkins' house. And the things that indicate Italianate houses most clearly are that they have a hip roof, they have arch top windows, and they have oftentimes a cupola, like this house does, which from this very high elevation would look out across the whole Penobscot Valley, which would be really quite beautiful. So you see also double brackets and a deep overhang of the roof. This is borrowed from Italy. We're still borrowing styles at this point. Dr. Brookings' office is next door to this house, Russ Harrington's house. You know Russ? You guys probably know Russ Harrington. And it's an Italianate house called the Cutter House, because Cutter was a builder architect, which basically took ideas and did several houses in the same style around Bangor. The porches probably were added later. But what makes it Italianate is this very powerful roof and the brackets that support it. That's a critical detail for this style. And you may have heard of Stephen King, and he lives in, or occasionally lives in an Italianate house, which really had the core of this house, the Arnold house, was this block and this tower. And other things were added over the years, such as a turret in the Queen Anne style that you see. And this is actually colonial revival work on the porch, cochere, and the front porch. So what you see in the tower, the double archtop windows, very common in this style. And you see the siding on this is what we call rusticated siding. It's basically a horizontal band of wood, that the wood quality, again, was really superior. So it enables this to lay flat for many, many years, maybe original product. Sometimes we'll see this scored vertically to look like block. You see houses that actually had scored patterns, like this one. If you ever go by the Blake House, or next time you go by on Court Street, take a look at this siding because it is scored to look like large blocks. And it's actually a wood exterior. Probably would have been painted in a kind of a gray to look more like stone. But this is a magnificent house. And it exhibits Second Empire style, which is borrowing from France at this time on the mansard roofs. And the mansard roof can come in very many different shapes. In this case, it's concave, which develops these beautiful bell dormers, they're called. See double brackets. This is a beautiful example of Second Empire, designed by Calvin Ryder, who was a very important Maine architect. This is my favorite house in Bangor, and I like to share that with everybody because I love the way this, it's a simple house, but the vertical alignments of everything just feels satisfying. It's a beautiful house on West Broadway. Set back quite a ways. And how they would take a slate shingle and they would actually scallop it to look like fish scales, and that would enable them to do this curved, concave slate roof. Fascinating. Great craftsmanship went into these houses. And when I do this talk with third graders in Bangor and I ask them what's their favorite style, guess what? The Queen Anne style is everybody's favorite. And they love it, I think, because it's so hard to explain. It's basically a house that's built that tries not to do much for exterior walls, tries to move bay windows out, builds turrets on, adds detailing that is just fabulous, based on, loosely on European castles. So, very interesting detail house. This one is up near Abraham Lincoln School. And I love this panel work. The panel work that's in here kind of speaks a little bit about another style called the stick style, where they actually would use shapes like this to develop detail in the house. Stick style is kind of a spin-off of that. Shingle style is kind of, this one's more shingle and Queen Anne. And this house is on Union Street, called the Pier House. And you can see that all kinds of expression was put in cutting these shingles. So they felt like sawtooth, which you see here. You see wave pattern up here. And the stick style that I just talked about is basically exhibited up there in the gable tops. This is a really wonderful house. And I always say that I can imagine this on a spooky Halloween night, you know, when the kids are going up to the door and they have to go underneath this great turret. It must feel kind of frightening for them to move underneath that. So the last style I think we're talking about is called Craftsman, and Bangor has some wonderful Craftsman style houses. This one is on Somerset Street in Bangor. This used to be an open porch, I'm guessing, but it's been infilled, and that happens over time. But they still expressed it in a way that used cottage windows. That means it has a sash in the top, but not the bottom, and muttons in the top, but not the bottom. So, lovely Craftsman house. And the last house that we're going to review here is a Sears house. This was a Sears-made house. It actually arrived by train. All the pieces were numbered. So all the craftsmen had to do was put the pieces together, and they would end up with the Valonia, which sold at that time for a whopping $1,870. So you get your Valonia house. I've been in this house. It's really quite tidy and small, but still beautiful. So next time you're on Pine Street or you're riding by Broadway Park, take a look around, and you'll see this Valonia house. So.
All right. So we're getting close to the end, but just
Yeah.
wanted to give you some other updates that are happening. So we are currently working on our historic preservation ordinance to add some flexibility and some clarification and additional guidance for people when they are doing alterations or new construction. That will take us a little while, but we're going to do 2 rounds of edits. The first round, we'll do some things like that are kind of higher priority. For example, there's currently a stipulation in there that for certificates of appropriateness, you have to have 4 members make a positive action in order to pass that. So we're changing that to a majority. That's kind of been a sticking point with some of the applications lately. That's just one example. So we're going to do round 1 of those edits, and then we'll do another round later on that will focus more on new construction and providing guidelines for those. So look for that over the next couple months. The other thing that we're doing right now is updating our land development code. We're basically overhauling it, and so a lot of things will change with that. Our zoning, how land development applications happen. We're trying to make it more user-friendly, more streamlined, and also, make it more flexible in terms of uses and things like that in our different zones. So we are expecting a new draft in the next couple months. So the first draft is going to be reviewed by staff to kind of work out kinks and make sure it covers everything that we feel it should cover. And then after that, we'll have a published draft that will come out for people to get feedback on. So possibly this summer to this fall, you can expect to see that. So you can go to blueprintbangor.com to get updates on that process and get notified when we do have those new drafts come out. So I just wanted to let people know about that. We do have lunch here. I do just want to take, me or
Yeah.
Mike, take any questions from
Yeah.
people on what's been covered so far.